France, 1969. A young man quietly sits in a small cafe. He looks calm as he finishes his coffee. A few seconds later, two police officers walk through the front door. They are not looking for a dangerous criminal. They are looking for a 21-year-old man who has fooled banks, hotels, airlines, and police officers across America. The young man slowly stands up. He knows the game is over. His name is Frank Abagnale. But just 3 years earlier, nobody even knew who he was. 3 years earlier, Frank was living a completely different life. He was not famous. He was not rich. He was simply a teenager trying to escape his problems. After his parents divorced, everything changed. Home no longer felt safe, and Frank believed the only way forward was to leave. He packed a small suitcase and walked away, without knowing that one decision would change his life forever. Frank had no money, no job, and no plan. But he had one unusual talent. He watched people carefully. He noticed that confidence could open doors. A friendly smile, a calm voice, and nice clothes often made people trust a stranger. Then one day, while standing in an airport, he noticed something else. Nobody questioned airline pilots. That simple observation gave him an idea that sounded impossible. Frank kept watching airline pilots. They walked through airports without stopping. Hotel employees smiled at them. Airport staff trusted them immediately. It was not because they knew the pilots. It was because of the uniform. Frank realized something important. People often trusted what they saw before they asked any questions. If he looked like a pilot, maybe people would believe he was one. According to Frank's own story, he found a way to get a real-looking pilot uniform. The moment he put it on, everything felt different. Strangers smiled at him. People stepped aside to let him pass. Nobody asked who he really was. It was the first time Frank understood how powerful appearance could be. One simple uniform had opened doors that had always been closed. The uniform was only part of the plan. Frank knew that clothes alone were not enough. He copied the way pilots walked, talked, and greeted people. He stayed calm and never looked nervous. If someone asked a question, he answered without hesitation. The more confident he looked, the less people questioned him. Soon, acting like a pilot started to feel completely natural. Frank soon learned about a system called deadheading. Airline crew members could sometimes travel as passengers when they needed to reach another city for work. According to Frank, he used this system to fly across America without paying for tickets. Every flight gave him more confidence. Every successful trip made him believe he could fool almost anyone. Traveling for free was exciting, but Frank wanted more than free flights. He wanted money, freedom, and the life he had always imagined. As he visited different cities, he spent time watching banks and learning how they worked. He noticed that employees trusted official documents without looking too closely. That small detail gave him another dangerous idea. Frank had found a way to travel, but he still needed money. During his trips, he watched how banks handled checks. Employees looked at signatures, stamps, and account numbers. They trusted documents that looked official. According to investigators, Frank carefully studied this process. Before long, he was ready to test an idea that could change his life forever. Frank started with small amounts of money. He did not want to attract attention. When a bank accepted one of his fake checks, he could hardly believe it. Then, another bank accepted one, and another. Every success made him feel more confident. But with every successful check, he was also leaving behind another clue for the police. During the day, Frank looked like a respected airline pilot. At night, he stayed in expensive hotels and enjoyed a life that most people his age could only imagine. Nobody around him knew his real story. Every morning, he put on the same uniform and stepped into another role. The lie was becoming part of his everyday life. The easiest part was not creating a new identity. The easiest part was watching people believe it. Hotel managers welcomed him. Restaurant staff thanked him for his service. Strangers smiled and started confidence more than facts. That lesson would stay with him for the rest of his life. While Frank was enjoying his new life, banks across America were reporting the same problem. Fake checks were appearing in different cities. At first, the cases seemed unrelated, but investigators slowly noticed a pattern. They believed one person was behind everything. They just did not know who he was yet. Frank had fooled many people, but he could not fool everyone forever. The investigation was growing larger every week. More police officers joined the search, and more banks shared information. Frank still believed he was one step ahead, but somewhere, someone was beginning to understand exactly how he worked. Frank believed he was careful, but even careful people make mistakes. Every city he visited left behind small traces, a signature, a document, or a memory from someone who had seen him. At first, these details seemed unimportant, but over time, investigators started connecting them. Slowly, Frank was no longer just a name without a face. The FBI was now working full-time on the case. Agents compared reports from different states and noticed the same pattern repeating again and again. A young man in a pilot uniform. Fake checks. Quick disappearances. They did not know his next move, but they were starting to understand how he thought. Frank realized that staying in the United States was becoming dangerous. So, he left the country and traveled to Europe. He believed a new place meant a new chance. At first, everything felt easier. Different language, different cities, different people. But he did not realize that information about him had already crossed the ocean. Frank thought distance would protect him. But international police cooperation was improving. Information about his fake checks and identity was being shared between countries. Even in Europe, people were starting to look for a young American man who could change his identity easily. In 1969, Frank's luck finally ended. French authorities arrested him after receiving information from American investigators. After years of running, there was nowhere left to go. The young man who once walked through airports with confidence was now in handcuffs, facing the reality he had avoided for so long. For the first time in years, Frank was no longer moving. There were no flights, no hotels, no new identities, only silence. In prison, he had time to think about every decision he had made. Each success and each mistake now felt very different. What once felt like a game now had serious consequences. After his arrest, Frank faced serious prison time in multiple countries. For the first time, he could not escape by changing his identity. However, authorities saw something unusual in his case. He understood fraud in a way most people did not. Instead of only punishing him, they began to consider another option. Frank was given a choice that would change his future completely. Frank accepted a deal. In exchange for helping investigators understand financial fraud, his sentence would be reduced. The same man who once created fake identities was now explaining how those tricks worked. It was a strange situation. He was no longer running from the system. He was helping the system understand people like himself. Investigators quickly realized Frank had rare knowledge. He knew how criminals think because he had done it himself. He could explain how fake checks were created, how identities were changed, and how people were manipulated. This information was valuable. It helped banks and institutions improve their security systems and prevent future fraud. After leaving prison, Frank slowly built a completely new life. This time, he did not use fake identities. Instead, he used his experience to help companies and banks. He became a security consultant and public speaker. People now invited him to speak about crime prevention, not because he committed crimes, but because he understood them deeply. Over time, Frank's story became widely known. His life inspired books, and later a Hollywood movie called Catch Me If You Can. Millions of people learned about his story through film and media. Some saw him as a genius. Others still questioned how much of the story was completely true. But there was no doubt that his life had become famous around the world. Even after becoming famous, questions remained about Frank's past. Some journalists and researchers examined his claims and found details that were difficult to confirm. Certain parts of his story were debated for years. This created an interesting situation. Was Frank Abagnale the greatest con artist of his time, or also a master storyteller? Regardless of what is fully true or not, Frank's story teaches an important lesson. People often trust appearance more than reality. Confidence can influence decisions, and small details can change big outcomes. In today's world, where information spreads quickly, thinking carefully before trusting something has become more important than ever. Frank Abagnale's journey from a teenager running fake identities to a security expert is one of the most unusual stories in modern history. It shows how intelligence can be used in very different ways. The same skills that once created fraud later helped prevent it. His story continues to be discussed, studied, and remembered around the world. So the question is not just what Frank Abagnale did. The real question is why so many people believed him. Because sometimes people do not see the truth. They see what they expect to see, and that is the most powerful trick of all.